Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya. I'm so grateful that you're here listening to this podcast episode and would love for you to share this podcast episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. If you haven't already done so, please follow or subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this episode out and the podcast to the wider community. Your contribution of subscribing and following helps get this out to the wider platforms. Today's guest is David Mark Quigley, also known as Mr. I Ching, transformed his struggle with dyslexia into a successful career as a best-selling author and skilled hypnotherapist. He has mastered the I Ching to assist others in overcoming personal and professional challenges. His unique journey and expertise in consulting with ancient wisdom, combined with his hypnotherapy skills, makes him an inspiring speaker, shares how timeless insights can resolve modern dilemmas. Let's welcome David Mark Quigley to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Anthony. I think I'm going to listen to this guy. That sounded really great. Well done.
Yeah, me too.
It was actually funny when I first went on the discovery call with you. So I didn't think you actually knew where I come from, because the first words out of my mouth were Kia ora.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like, I saw you step back. I was like, whoa, hang on a minute, what's going on here? So it's great to be on a podcast with another Kiwi, because I do quite a lot of these, but I don't think I've ever done one with another Kiwi. So this is pretty refreshing. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're definitely the first Kiwi living abroad on this podcast. Yeah, most of the people I speak to are either American, Canadian. I've got people from all around the world joining these podcasts, so it's great to connect with another Kiwi. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I left New Zealand officially in what was that, 1996 or 97? So I've been away for a long time, even though I've had New Zealand businesses, which I'm going to touch on a little bit today. But yeah, I've resided now for the last 15 odd years in Southwest Florida, and prior to that in the Caribbean. So, and prior to that in the US. So yeah, pretty vast, a vast collage of places that I've lived, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, David. So, David, while we're on that topic of where you've lived and so on, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, about your from childhood, the transitions that you've been through, the challenges you've been through, how you've overcome those, and what's led you to where you are today, and what have you learned, and how do you help people?
Okay, so I've suffered from severe dyslexia from a very early age. And so I suffered blunt force trauma to the left side of my head at an early age. I was probably genetically predisposed to dyslexia, but it exhibited from that very early age. And from then on, I soon discovered that I had a great deal of difficulty with the written word, and I struggled with reading, spelling, those sort of things. So schooling was a real challenge for me. And I remember an event. It was I went to a boarding school in Christchurch, St Andrews College, and we had this geography teacher called Fred Goodall. Fred was a cricket umpire, international cricket umpire. He was also a geography teacher, but he used to get one of the boys to stand up in class and read from the textbook we were studying. And this particular day, it was my turn. I was mortified because I couldn't read to save myself. And so I stood up, opened up the textbook, and there it was, and I just couldn't read it. Luckily, there was a boy behind me in class. His name was Andrew Russell. God bless him. He whispered the words. I repeated them, and I got through that ordeal. But that was what it was like at school. And so I left school, and I went to go and work on the land as a farming. And I remember my father coming to me one day and saying, that I wasn't indispensable and that anybody could do my job. And I thought, oh, great, thanks, Dad. So I went overseas. And so I traveled overseas, and a whole new world opened up to me. And so I remember I'd just been through Africa, and I was in train station in London. It was, I can't remember which train station, but I was standing outside the bookseller, W.H. Smith. And I was on a train journey for 2.5 hours. And I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do? Because there was no cell phones back then. There was no, video devices or anything like that. And I spied on the front rack of W.H. Smith, the bookseller, this book. And it had a lion on the front cover. And it immediately took me back to when I was in Africa. I was in Botswana, and we were going through the Chobe Game Reserve. We were a place called Zanin, and we'd broken up camp, and we were going down this game viewing. We were going down this track. We turned the corner, and here was this lion, full mane lion, following this lioness in heat. I was up on the game viewing the platform with the two other. There was a South African girl and a German bloke, and this lion took one look at the Land Rover, turned and charged us.
Wow.
And the South African and the German, they tumbled back through the game viewing hat and slammed it closed behind me. So I was trapped up on the roof. And so anyway, but all I was concentrating on doing was getting the photograph of this lion charging towards me. And so anyway, I felt no fear. I felt no, all I had was this intense focus on this lion. And as the lion smashed into the grill of the Land Rover, because the guy driving it was going back at speed as fast as he could, but he smashed into the front grill, and I got the photograph of a lifetime. And so I don't tell that story about the lion. I tell it about the book, because that book was by Wilbur Smith, and it was When the Lion Feeds. And it was the very first book that I ever read. And I was 23 years of age.
Wow.
And so it was a struggle for me to get through it, but it opened up another world to me, just like traveling overseas. And I realized, look, if I want to learn, or I want to take advantage of the opportunities this world has to offer, I'm going to have to get over this dyslexia. Because I also had an incredible fear growing up, just an unreasonable fear, because certain things that happened when I was growing up. And so one thing I learned, that when I was overseas, I didn't have this fear. And so I ended up going back to New Zealand, and I studied for and received the diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. And I started a hypnotherapy practice because I wanted to get over this dyslexia. But the thing that happened for me was that the fear that I'd left back in New Zealand when I traveled overseas came back. And so that hypnotherapy practice morphed into a peak performance consultancy. And it was because I wanted to perform at a peak level. And so I studied for and I got this diploma. But then, shock horror, I had to write these personalized therapies and inductions for the clients that came to me. And so I thought, what am I going to do? This is a bit of a snag. And so I remember it was one Sunday afternoon. It was a dreary, rainy Christchurch Sunday afternoon, and I was lying on the spare bedroom bed, looking out the window, looking at the rain on the window pane. I thought, Jesus, man, what are we going to do here? And so I thought, oh no, I'm going to write a book. And so I started writing, and it was that beginning to write that book started allowing me to get over my dyslexia. Because what I found, that even though it was a struggle at the start, I would eventually lapse into this place, like being on that game viewing platform on the Land Rover, where there was no fear, there was no anxiety, and I could spend hours just writing. And that's where the first book, Scars of the Leopard, came from. It followed this dyslexic misfit around the world. And so I just wrote about my adventures and what I had seen and learned. And so along the way, that peak performance consultancy, it was based on regression therapy. because I felt that if I could identify those traumas or those experiences that have held the people back and change that subconscious imprinting, then people could perform at peak levels. And again, that's what I wanted to happen with me. And so the more I helped other people, the more I helped myself. And so, but it was through the writing that I started getting over the dyslexia. And so neuroplasticity started rewiring some of those damaged areas of my brain. I started to be able to have that spatial reasoning of understanding how words form together, structured into sentences, into paragraphs, into chapters. And it turned out that I could string a sentence together and tell a story. And so, but dealing with a subconscious mind, I learned several things. I learned that we're all interconnected, because when you're dealing with somebody in their subconscious mind, the thought process is slightly different. And so I learned about our interconnectedness then, and that also we are greatly influenced by our external environment, but also what's going on inside us and how we interact as humans about that. And so anyway, I had that practice, but I still had that fear, Anthony. And so I did the thing that had worked for me before, was I went overseas again. And so I lived and worked all around the world, spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, North America, Europe, and those places to basically, I suppose, I was running away from that fear, being honest about it. And so anyway, I was down in the Caribbean for 10 years, and I went and officially immigrated to the US in 2006, I believe. And I started working as a general contractor. So general contractor is like a master builder. I could build up to 22 stories. And so that was where I structured my life at that time, until I fell off the roof. And I shattered a calcaneus, my left heel, separated the shoulder, and I had severe head trauma. And so I ended up on my back for 6 months. And during that time, I had a lot of questions. And it was during that time I was introduced to the I Ching. So, and it resonated with me because it reinforced what I learned through hypnotherapy, that we're all interconnected, that the external environment greatly influences us, and what is going on inside has a great deal of influence over us as well, and how we interact as human beings about those will dedicate how balanced a life we're going to live. And so so that was 15 years ago, and so I've been using it ever since. And it's a great personal, but it was also a great business tool. And so I've used it for myself and clients for peak performance, because you've got to take responsibility for yourself if you want to advance. And the other thing that I learned through my hypnotherapy practice was that if you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered. So the I Ching, the ancient wisdom of the I Ching, was written 3,000 years ago by 4 scholars. One of them we know, Confucius. It's built on 64 building blocks of change. And so the only constant in our life is change.
Change, absolutely.
And so if you can know where you are in those building blocks of change, and you know what the external environment is that's influencing you, and what your internal energy is all about, you're going to know how to interact constructively with that situation, whether it be personal or whether it be business. And I'm going to give you an example. I started the earthquakes in Christchurch, 2011, 2012. I ended up being down in Christchurch on 2012 after I recovered from my fall. I'd lost most of my clients because I couldn't service them in the construction business. And so I went to Christchurch and I started my a asbestos consultancy down there. And so I worked initially with my brother, who's a master builder, but I have a lot of knowledge when it comes to asbestos because I ran the second largest re-roofing company in Southern California. We had an asbestos abatement license. So I brought that knowledge to the rebuild. And I would use the I Ching to structure how I ran my business. I was called into Fletcher's EQR on 3 occasions to try and reduce the tender price that I had tendered for my asbestos consultancy and the removal. And on all 3 occasions, they wanted to bring me in line with other asbestos consultants who had tendered lower prices. They wanted to reduce my fees. Every time I went in there, I used the I Ching to figure out what was going on externally, what I needed to do internally, and how to interact it at a human level. All 3 occasions, my fees were increased. And that is the advantage of the I Ching. And so I'm always using it if I need clarification on a particular topic or a particular area. So that's an example of how it can be used in a business realm and how I've used it. And it was the I Ching that I turned to originally before I went back to New Zealand. And one of the building blocks of change was the one called turning back or return. I knew what it meant. I didn't want to do it, but I ended up going back to New Zealand and I ran that business for 10 years from Southwest Florida, even though I spent a lot of time in Christchurch. I also had a home here in Southwest Florida. It was a long commute, but we worked it out. But so I used the I Ching to structure the business. And I originally went there because it directed me to do it. And then I did it to find out how to run it effectively while still maintaining my residence here in Southwest Florida. And so what we ended up doing was the day-to-day running was all out of Christchurch, but everything financial ran out of Florida. And that was controlled by my wife. So payroll, accounts receivable, accounts payable, invoicing was all done from Florida. And we did the day-to-day running in Christchurch, all because of how we were directed by the I Ching. And so to give you an example, that business did over 200,000 samples. So just extrapolate that out over a 10-year period and figure out how many samples that is that I had to do per day. At one stage, I had, I think, 7 full-time samplers sampling for that earthquake-damaged city.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was, it is an incredible business tool if you know how to interpret what you're looking at. And so I have a business here. It's an Oracular Wisdom, I Ching for the Modern World. And so I've used it so much that I can interpret it for the modern world, even though the way that it's written in poetry, metaphors, those type of things. And so we all know Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, correct?
Yes.
And so he was a great believer in the I Ching. And he's got a great quote where he says the I Ching is never wrong.
Mm.
And so he forwarded one of the most famous books that was translated by um, Richard Wilhelm, and he forwarded that book about how he perceived the I Ching. And so a lot of his philosophy is about archetypical symbols throughout history and collective unconscious. And so the things that I've learned through my subconscious, through my hypnotherapy practice, is the power of the subconscious mind, the power of empathy, but also the power of the quantum state,
Mm.
which is what he talks about through synchronicity,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are all interconnected, and we have this universal unconscious. And so, and it can be predicated by these archetypical symbols that are seen all around the world.
Mm.
The Mayan temples, the Egyptian temples, those type of things. And so what he says is that they are the language of our species at a very subtle, intuitive level. And so when you undertake a I Ching consultation, you are tapping into your own intuition and your own unconscious, universal unconscious connection with everything else. So if you ask me a question, you are giving me permission to intuitively work with you to have you answer that question.
Mm.
And so that's what the basis of it is. It is our external environment with our internal energies and how we act or react with those as human beings as we go through the cycles of change.
Yeah.
And I've just added that if you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have an answer.
Mm. 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 Absolutely.
And so I'll give you an example. We've just been through a horrific hurricane here in Southwest Florida. We've only just really got our power and our internet back on. And I actually did an I Ching consultation specifically for me and my environment for that hurricane. And I knew with what came up, it was going to be a lot of wind, but very dry. And that's exactly what it was.
Mm.
And so we lost power full time for about 24 hours. It's been a bit intermittent. Internet's been on and off. But that was essentially what I knew was going to happen, because I've been dealing with this for 15 years now. And I just have this intuitive sense of knowing what it's basically saying. And so it allows me to pass it on to those individuals and corporations and companies that come to me for advice.
Yeah, intuition is so powerful, isn't it? Like when you really start listening to yourself and your inner, your higher self and your intuition, and really start to take notice of it, then it is so powerful in what you can perceive of what's about to happen. And so for you, you said you've been through so many different hurricanes in your time in Florida, and like this time, how did that make you feel, knowing that you already had the intuition about what was going to happen, and it would have been calmness for you in some way?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we lost power at 11:30 at night. The hurricane hit at about 8. And I suppose I was just calm. This is probably the calmest I've ever been so this is my 6th direct hit hurricane. And even though this one hit up the coast slightly, but yeah, I suppose this is the calmest that I'd ever been, really.
Mm. And we were talking before this record interview about how, like, I've had a storm in my life over the last 20, 30 years, and just gone through like my 24th restructure and my 4th redundancy. And it's like, when I look at the journey for the first time I got made redundant to now, I'm a lot calmer. I remember crying my eyes out at the first one. Second one, I was like resentful and angry. Third one, I was like, what opportunities are there? And now I'm like, hey, it's change. It's constant, as you said before. You just gotta you just gotta listen to your intuition. And for me, what came out of this was that there's a learning in here for me. And I was like asking God, universe is going, why do I keep going through this? What is the learning? And then it wasn't until I realized that actually I'm meant to help others who are going through this and help them heal, help them transition in their life. And maybe for some of these people, it is leaving their 9 to 5 and actually starting their own business, or figuring out what it is really from within that drives them, what the passion is and the purpose is, and following that purpose, which you did. You've gone from your dyslexia to becoming a best-selling author, which is truly remarkable. You've shaped your path, mastering I Ching, and then writing a book in hypnotherapy and all that. So with the I Ching, did you go and learn that, or did you just learn it yourself? How did you go about becoming a practitioner of I Ching?
Okay, so I've read numerous books on it. So one of the very first ones that was ever translated was done in 1882, I believe.
Mm,
So um, so I have a copy of that particular book. I have the copy of Richard Wilhelm's with the Carl Jung's forward, and I have probably another, I'd say another half a dozen as well. And so, admittedly, in the early days, it was tough going. And so, but the more I used it, the more it resonated. So it can be, if I didn't have the experience that I had with my hypnotherapy practice, I don't know if I would have been able to pick it up as well. So it definitely helped me having this knowledge of how the subconscious mind works to be able to understand a lot of the way that it's written. For example, there's one book that talks about being steadfast and upright. All being steadfast and upright is having genuine integrity.
mm,
So, but another one goes on about fortune or misfortune. Another one goes on about blame or remorse. And so you've got to be able to put it into the vernacular that you and I would use today. And so that has probably been the biggest struggle for me, because I understand what they're saying, but then I've got to be able to relay it to somebody who comes to me for advice. And so, I'm in the process of presenting a book proposal that I've just about finished on I Ching for the modern world, because there's nothing out there that really assists people to use it for the business, for sports, for peak performance, for business, for those type of things. And I'll admit, I'm a serial entrepreneur. And so I will use whatever resources get me over the start line. And I'm not going to say the finish line, because it's a
journey.
Yeah, it's a journey.
Absolutely. It's a journey. Yeah.
And so for you, you've been through 24 redundancies and restructuring, what have you. That is a great example of change, because that's it. The only thing that is constant in our world is change. And if you can get a handle on where you are, which building block of change you reside in at that current situation, you're way ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
And then if you can tap into that interconnectedness that we all share, that's another step forward as well. And so it's breaking down those preconceived notions of what energetically this world means and how to adapt within it. Whether it's God in heaven, whether it's the God within us, whether it's universal intelligence, Buddha, or whatever it is, whatever resonates with you, there is something there that allows people to live a far more balanced life. And again, I'm going to say it. If you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered. For 35 years, Anthony, every night before I turn off the light, I will ask myself 3 or 5 questions. And it could be very mundane. It could be about a chapter I'm writing in a book, or it could be something more complex that I want an answer to. But because I've got it down and I've asked the question, I'm allowing my subconscious, and I don't look for the answer when I've written it down. I just allow my subconscious to answer those questions for me. It may be the next day, it may be the next week, it may be the next month. But if you keep asking, you'll receive the answer. Ask and ye shall, what is it?
Receive.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, ask and you shall receive. Absolutely. And what you've said is so true. It completely resonates with with the journey that I'm on and what how I'm helping people as well. And so,
well, also sometimes, Ethan, you got to give back.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it's what feels right to you, what resonates. It'll open up doors that you perhaps didn't even realize were closed.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for example, this podcast, this is probably the 60th episode I'm recording, so you're number 60. And I've been doing these for free. I'm not charging anyone. I'm just really, all I'm wanting to do is share these stories because it's going to impact, it's going to inspire, it's going to touch someone, right? And I'm not focusing on the money or any of that. I'm just focusing on giving. And I know that one day it will come back tenfold, and because for me, it's about sharing my journey, sharing my story, sharing other people's stories so that people who are as you said, we're a collective conscious. We are all connected and synchronicities will come along because people will resonate with something that's happening in your life at that point in time, and they'll reach out to you when they are ready for help. I just had someone who I've been trying to help for a couple of years now, and finally he resonated and he said, "Hey, I think I'm ready to seek some help from you now." So so often so people who are listening to this, you might be chasing clients, you might be looking for customers, but they will come when the time is right. They will come when you're resonating with them. And so just be who you are and genuinely give them value, and they will come to you. So yeah, what you've shared is amazing. So David, both as a hypnotherapist and a master of I Ching, how do you integrate both of these disciplines to help people in their personal and professional challenges?
Okay, well, I don't actually practice hypnotherapy anymore, and I've chosen to put that to the side because one thing I found is that people have got to take responsibility for themselves. And so when I was running my peak performance consultancy in New Zealand, one thing that I learned is that people kept coming back to me for that fix, I suppose. And so they weren't necessarily taking the next step themselves. And so that's why I resonate so strongly with the I Ching, is because the first thing that the person's got to do is they've got to ask a question. And by asking that question, that alone is going to open up some doors, and it's going to help clarify certain areas that they perhaps had neglected or they hadn't seen. And so a lot of people that come to me, by asking the question, half of the answer has already come. So yeah, that's and so that's, and that is an opportunity for somebody to, you know, take responsibility for themselves. They're going to admit, yep, I want this question answered. This is the thing that is holding me back, and this is what I want answered. And by interacting with me to clarify the question, a lot of the work's already done.
Absolutely.
And
it's the awareness, right? It's once you have that awareness of what's going on, then you, like you said, half the work is already done because you've got that awareness of what's going on.
yep, and then you just need to clarify the external and the internal energy and how to interact to get that balance. And so it's and the way that I do it is I do it a little different. So I will give somebody's current situation. This is where you are right here and now. This is your current situation. And I'm going to give them the underlying influence of what predicates this situation. And then I will also give them their future potential. If they follow the advice of the ancient wisdom to be able to put in steps to gain that future potential. So it's like a 3-step process: understanding where you are, the current situation, what predicates or underlies that, and where you can take it.
Yeah.
Or what you've got to do to prevent potential misfortune. And it could be as simple as staying still or even retreating, because retreat is a form of advance, especially if you still have that main goal in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my philosophy and my coaching and how I help people is the first step is awareness. Be aware of what's happening and so on. And then the second part is about going and discovering what are the opportunities, and then taking a line action. So it's kind of what you've explained is kind of resonates directly with.
Well, there's another step there as well, and that's validation. So you've got to identify.
Yes.
You've got to identify, and then you've got to go through those 2 steps. But the fourth step is the validation. Did I do it correctly, or was there something else that I can do?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so could you share, like, you don't have to name anyone, but could you share some clients that you've used I Ching with, and how that's helped them overcome their obstacles like anxiety, self-doubt, and you know, even personal career or personal lives?
Actually, there's a really good, on my YouTube channel, I've got a couple of videotaped readings, consultations that I did. And so one's on a relationship and one's on purpose, life's purpose. And so either of those ones would be quite good for somebody to listen to get a feel for what a consultation involves. And so I know the one with purpose, it clarified. That one was actually quite quite straightforward, because she asked the question and she started clarifying it herself, and then everything fell into place with after the reading. And I know she's an influencer now on social media. She's natural health practitioner, and she changed her approach of how to the content that she put up. And I think one of the recent ones, it's like she's had over a million views, and so it clarified how to present herself and basically what to do. So
awesome. So there you go.
So that's not really about anxiety or whatever. I'm just trying to think if I've had something recently about anxiety or
because that's quite a common thing for a lot of people these days, especially with economic stuff and so on, and with uncertainties around people being made redundant and so on. Anxiety is a very something that's coming up quite a bit in people that I've spoken to recently, and so it would be great if you're able to share an example or point people to.
I could probably go back. See, one of the things that I do, Anthony, is I treat this like my hypnotherapy practice. I will not talk about clients' situations unless that client gives me permission.
Oh, absolutely.
Because here in the States, they've got this thing called HIPAA, which is confidentiality and all that sort of stuff. So, it's but when somebody says, yeah, Mark, I'll give you a testimonial or what have you, and there's some pretty good written ones there as well that people would probably resonate with.
And they can find that on your website?
Yeah, they can. Yes, definitely on the website. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of video testimonials on my YouTube channel as well.
YouTube channel, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
cool. Well, there you go. If you're keen to have a look, if you're watching this episode, listening to it, then go and check out David's YouTube channel or his website. I'll put the links into the description so that people can go and find you. One thing I wanted to ask you was, I see those books in the background with the wildlife, and I was a little bit confused when I looked at your website initially, and I was like, okay, this man is like a hypnotherapist and he's practicing I Ching, but how does it tie into the wildlife conservation side of things? Could you tell us a little bit?
Well, I write about, in my spare time, I write about aggressive wildlife conservation.
Okay.
And so I want to be the voice for those animals that don't have one. So I also have a registered non-profit that a percentage of all my royalties goes to, and I contribute to wildlife causes around the world. And so the book, I've just finished one about the most trafficked mammal in the world, the pangolin. And so that will be going out to publication probably within the year or so. And prior to that, it was about, I think the one prior to that was the African lion, which is about an extinct species of lion that are basically resurrected, but it was more about aggressive wildlife protection in and around Africa. And so because there's so much pressure on those keystone species, and if we lose them, there is going to be a roll-on effect that's eventually going to affect us. And so I just want to give back, because it was that book, Wilbur Smith, When the Lion Feeds, based in Africa, that allowed me to get over dyslexia and to find a a purpose that resonated with me.
So David, is there any themes of I Ching that harmonize with the books that you write and the stories that you tell?
Well, actually, yeah, the pangolin one has a Chinese flair to it, definitely. So, but I can't really divulge too much of that until it's actually published.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but a lot of it is more for me personally, because I want to be able to tell a story that that resonates with people, that entertains them. And so a lot of the I Ching that's part of these books is assisted me with what's the next step? What would this person do? How would he interact with this environment that he's in, this predicament that he's in? How would he get over it? There's a lot of martial arts in the last two books.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first one, the last rhino, I put that free on Amazon Kindle, so people can download for free. And it's more of a novella, but it gives a flair of how I write. And that book is written about a specific wildlife rescue program that was run in the 1980s called Operation Stronghold. And so a lot of the characters I write about were actually real. The main character is a figment of my imagination, but it was real because I was there in Africa at that time, and I interacted with loosely with some of those people. I want to be able to get that out there so people then can go through the series, and I will be able to donate on their behalf through my nonprofit to wildlife causes.
Mm.
And so the Wildlife Foundation it's a Quigley Wildlife Foundation. So it's a true foundation. There's 5 directors. I don't control it. We have a board that we meet with, and we make decisions of where the funds are going to be distributed. But admittedly, most of the funds come from the royalties of my books. And so that's a way of giving back. I don't write to necessarily make a living. I have other ventures that I'm involved with that we probably won't touch on today, but yeah, it's about, I suppose, Anthony, it's about balance. And so the I Ching is about people gaining balance in their life. And so I write about the balance of the wilds of Africa and the wildlife within it.
Yeah.
So and those people that try and help that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So one last question before we kick into the 5 quick fire questions. If professionals and entrepreneurs are looking at finding clarity in their face of uncertainty, how could I Ching be a tool that helps them?
The I Ching is also called the Book of Change. And that's what it is. It's all about change. And so I do a lot of environmental consulting here in Southwest Florida. And so a home is a living environment, but also a business is a living and has its own energy as well. And so, and it's going to change. And it's going to change because of the input from the employees, from the owners, from the shareholders, those type of things. And so we've got to be aware of how to balance that change and be aware of what stage of change it's in. is it in a stage where it needs to expand, or is it at a stage where it needs to stay still, or is it a stage where it needs to go in a slightly different direction? And so that's the same with individuals as well.
Yeah.
So if you can understand what part of change you are in, or your business is in, or your professional life is in, you're well ahead of anybody else. And it's just taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
If I was to leave your listeners with one thing, is this saying: if you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered. And so if they never looked at getting an I Ching consultation or doing anything other than at the end of each day writing down a question or a series of questions, a whole new world's going to open up for them. If you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered.
Yeah, because your subconscious mind is going to then take that question and find an answer for it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
How can I get over the anxiety that I feel? Question mark, close the book, and allow your subconscious mind, because whether it's the universe or God will never put you in a position that you cannot handle.
Yeah.
Totally. So you will always be able to handle a situation. It may be difficult at times, but some of those times that are the most challenging are the most rewarding in the end.
Yeah, because they are a time of growth, change and growth, because maybe you're meant to stretch and grow a little bit more so that you can go that extra further. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's been a theme in my life all the way through, And so for me, I'm permanently throwing myself in the uncomfortable zone because it's like I just want to keep growing. I just want to keep moving. It's interesting how when you've done that work, when you've stretched yourself, when you've gone through that change, how life becomes so much fulfilling, so much more. It starts to be just natural. It's just like you said, it's balanced, right?
Don't be afraid of questions.
Yeah.
Just write them down, even if you don't know what the answer is. You actually already do. It's just consciously you haven't.
Yeah.
You haven't.
Yeah.
They haven't risen to the surface yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. All right. So we're going to hit the quick fire questions now. And how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
It'll be balance and pursuing what feels right. So it may not be right for anybody else other than you. Yeah.
Next
Balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question: who's your greatest inspiration and why?
Be Wilbur Smith, that book, because he set me on a pathway to get over my dyslexia. And, dyslexia was is a gift for me. I'm very right hemisphere dominant. I think very differently than anybody else, but because I tackled writing and I wanted to produce something similar to Wilbur Smith, I've repaired areas that were damaged on the left side, and I function far more effectively than I ever could have if I never read that book. So take my hat off to that guy. And Wilbur Smith, the ones that he wrote himself, not necessarily the ones that are being churned out after his passing.
Well, one of the books that's changed my life is The Way of the Superior Man by David Dieter. Amazing book, and I read it over 3 weeks, and it completely changed my life.
Right.
Yeah. It's all about men following their passion and their purpose and their purposeful mission in life. Yeah.
Yep.
Third question, what is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
You got to get this. You got to get this life right because you don't want to come back and do it again.
Mm.
So, because my hypnotherapy and peak performance practice was so regression dominant, I've done so many regressions. I've probably done hundreds, if not thousands of them. And I've had CEOs sitting in my chair that have gone into lives that weren't of this lifetime. And so it changed my perspective of how we are influenced. And when a recognized business leader changes a traumatic imprinting within him by a subconscious belief that came from somewhere else, I'm not going to question it.
Mm.
So get this one right, because I don't want to have to come back and do it all over again.
No, certainly not. Yeah, agree. If you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't spend so much time in the Caribbean.
What's wrong with the Caribbean?
It was, for me, it was just a spiritually dead place.
Mm.
And it was an interesting time down there. I spent 10 years down there, but it was, and I learned an awful lot, but it was, it was if I could have just done that in a couple of years, I would have, and spent the other 8 somewhere else, it probably would have been better.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, last
Yeah.
question. What is one message that you would like to share with the world?
That one, Anthony, is real easy. And you're going to think I'm a parrot. If you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered.
No, absolutely. It's absolutely right. Yeah. Well, thank you, David, for joining us today on the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. It's been a pleasure. And people can get a hold of you by getting in touch or visiting your website. Is there any other ways that they can contact you?
David Mark Quigley .com. My YouTube channel is at David Mark Quigley. I think Instagram on Mr. I Ching, Mr. I Ching. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Right.
Go on Amazon. You've got
Yeah.
my books. I've got other books up there that don't relate to wildlife conservation, so which is another life that I lead, Anthony. So it's another very narrow field. I don't know why I do this, but anyway.
Yeah.
So it's I'm pretty easy to find on Google.
Cool. We'll put those links into the description of the podcast so that people can visit your pages and so on. So thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to talk with a fellow Kiwi living abroad, changing the world over there. And the thing is, we are all part of the collective, because collectively, individually, we can change our own world, but collectively, we can change the whole world. And
we're all interconnected, whether
absolutely.
we want to admit it or not.
Absolutely.
So the most unselfish thing that you can do is put 100% into yourself, and everybody around you is going to benefit.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being selfish by changing yourself, because you're going to benefit, others are going to benefit, and you're going to have a much more fulfilled and a life that you love. Yeah. Alrighty. So if you've been listening to this podcast episode and you've got some insights out of this, or you want to connect with David, I'd encourage you to connect with David or connect with myself. And if you'd like to share this episode on your social media, tag myself or David into that, and would love to see your comments. Lastly, I'd like to say, if you haven't already shared this with your friends and this podcast with your friends, your family, and your workmates, please do so. And please remember to subscribe or follow so that we can get it out to the wider world. And lastly, I just want to say that you are loved and you are worthy. Champion your life and champion your greatness within you. Thank you and have an amazing day.